Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jenny. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode, are catastrophic for British intelligence.
The Soviets are not bluffing.
That a German invasion is imminent.
They drop their bombs and miss their targets. Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Jenny. Last episode, we ended with George Elser's bomb going off in the Burgerbrücke Keller in Munich 13 minutes after Hitler left the building, killing 8 people, wounding 63, and missing the man it was built to kill by the length of a speech. Finland had just formally rejected the Soviet Union's demands for the last time, and the Jagiellonian University's professors had been lured into a lecture hall and arrested. This week, November 9th through the 17th, all of those threads pull tighter. The title of this episode comes from the last thing Molotov says to the Finnish delegation as they leave Moscow on November 13th. He tells them, "Because we civilians can't make any headway, it's the turn of the soldiers to have their say."
I'm Justin. Finland has just over 2 weeks left of peace. This week, the Allies formally endorse a battle plan that will contribute to the fall of France. Britain suffers a devastating blow to its intelligence network in Western Europe. Germany bombs the Shetlands and hits Rabbit. The first wartime Armistice Day comes and goes without the usual large public ceremony, and the British people observe the silence anyway. And in Prague, a student's funeral becomes a demonstration, and 9 student leaders are executed by firing squad in the aftermath. It is a week where the machinery of occupation shows what it does to ordinary acts of remembrance. November 9th, Venlo. Venlo is a small Dutch town on the German border in the southeastern Netherlands, right where the Maas River crosses from Germany into Holland, about 60 miles east of Amsterdam and roughly 5 miles from the German border. For the past several weeks, 2 senior British intelligence officers have been meeting a contact here who claimed to be a German army officer involved in a plot to overthrow Hitler.
The 2 Britons are Captain Sigismund Payne-Best and Major Richard Stevens. They are, between them, among the most senior British intelligence operatives in Western Europe. Over the course of multiple meetings, they believed they were building a relationship with genuine anti-Hitler conspirators inside the German military. To prove the connection was real, Best arranged for a coded confirmation signal to be broadcast on the BBC's German service. The signal was broadcast. The contact, who called himself Major Schmemmel, then promised to produce the general leading the plotters at their next meeting.
The next meeting is November 9th, the day after the Elser bomb, which Germany is now publicly blaming on British intelligence. Best and Stevens drive to a cafe a few yards from the German border. They noticed, just as they arrived, that the German barrier across the road had been lifted. Before they could process what that meant, their car is hit by machine gun fire. Armed men pour across the border. Best and Stevens are seized, bundled into vehicles, and driven into Germany. The entire operation takes approximately 30 seconds.
Major Schmemmel, it turns out, is Walter Schellenberg, a 29-year-old RSHA officer, one of Heinrich's men who spent weeks running a meticulous deception operation. Himmler had ordered the kidnapping immediately after the Munich bomb, using the Elser attack as the justification. British agents are plotting against the Führer, and here are 2 of them to prove it. Schellenberg crossed an international border and committed an act of war against a neutral country to make the arrest. The Dutch government protests vigorously. Nothing comes of the protest.
The consequences of what happens at Venlo are catastrophic for British intelligence. Much of Britain's continental intelligence network, built over years, is compromised or destroyed in the weeks that follow. Best and Stevens, under interrogation, identify many British agents operating in Western Europe. The British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, draws a lesson it holds for decades afterward. Never put your most senior people in the field where they can be captured. Best and Stevens spend the rest of the war as prisoners, though both would survive.
Also, on November 9th, In a less dramatic but historically interesting note, a young German soldier named Heinrich Böll, who will later become one of Germany's greatest post-war novelists and win the Nobel Prize for Literature, writes a letter home to his parents in Cologne. He asks them to send him Pervitin. Pervitin is what we would call today methamphetamine. German soldiers call it tank chocolate or pilot salt. The Wehrmacht had already distributed large quantities during the Polish campaign, and by late 1939, industrial-scale stimulant use within the German military is becoming widespread. Böll writes with the casual familiarity of someone asking for an aspirin. The industrial-scale stimulant use within the German military is known by some, but it is one of the least discussed aspects of the early war among the general public.
On November 13th, the final meeting between Soviet and Finnish negotiators takes place in Moscow. Finnish diplomat Juho Paasikivi and finance minister Väinö Tanner sit across the table from Stalin and Molotov for the last time. No agreement is reached. As the Finns prepare to leave, Molotov says, "Because we civilians can't make any headway, it's the turn of the soldiers to have their say."
Paasikivi hears this and understands it perfectly. He has been warning the Finnish government for weeks that the Soviets are not bluffing, that the demands must be met or war will follow. The problem is that almost nobody in Helsinki agrees with him. The general mood in Finland after the negotiations end is something close to relief. The feeling that the Soviets have been faced down, that Finland called their bluff, and that the worst is now over. The foreign minister, Alhas Urko, actually suggests that the army should be demobilized to save money. People who have voluntarily evacuated border regions begin moving back home.
To understand why this confidence is so misplaced, you have to understand what Stalin believes about Finland. His agents have told him that Finland is on the verge of social revolution, that the Finnish working class is ready to rise up, that the army will collapse the moment the Red Army crosses the border, that Soviet soldiers will be welcomed as liberators. He has already ordered the formation of a puppet government called the People's Government of Finland, to be headed by Otto Veli Kuusinen, a Finnish communist who fled to the Soviet Union after Finland's own civil war in 1918. Stalin believes he is planning a short, victorious campaign, not a difficult war. In his mind, this will look more like a parade than a prolonged conflict.
Field Marshal Baron Karl Gustav Emil Mannerheim is not sharing the national mood of relief. He has spent years trying to get the Finnish government to fund a proper military. His army has 337,000 men under arms, but for those men, there are only 254,000 rifles, many of varying quality. There is limited ammunition, and not all men have been given a full uniform. He has written reports, attended meetings, and argued in committees. He is considering resigning in protest if the politicians won't listen. They haven't listened. Finland has just over 2 weeks left of peace.
On November 11th, 1939, 21 years to the day since the guns fell silent at the end of the First World War, Britain's first wartime Armistice Day, the government has decided against holding the usual large public ceremony at the Cenotaph, the White Memorial in Whitehall in central London, where the nation has gathered every November 11th since 1920, on the grounds that it might be bad for morale to hold a commemoration for the dead of one war while fighting another. Wreaths are laid on behalf of the King and Queen, and that's officially it.
Unofficially, London does what it always does. People come to the cenotaph anyways, leaving flowers. At 11 a.m., the exact hour of the armistice, the 2-minute silence is observed across Britain without any official call or instruction. In the streets, on the buses, in the shops, people simply just stop. The silence happens because people choose to honor the war dead on their own, not because they were told to.
That evening, Queen Elizabeth, the mother of the more recent Queen Elizabeth, broadcasts to the women of the British Empire from Buckingham Palace. It is one of the more thoughtful addresses of the early war. She says, "War has, at all times, called for the fortitude of women, but now we, no less than men, have real and vital work to do." She acknowledges the particular burden of those at home, not the visible heroism of soldiers, but the daily management of broken family life, evacuated children, and financial strain. She says, quote, The king and I know what it means to be parted from our children, and we can sympathize with you." End quote. By this point, 45,000 women have volunteered for the women's services: the WRNS, the ATS, the WAAF, the nursing corps. The recruiting lists are so long that the WRNS has had to close enrollment. Women pilots are being accepted in Air Transport Auxiliary, ferrying planes from factories to squadrons. British women are playing a very large part in the British war effort.
Also, on November 11th, in France, a colonel named Charles de Gaulle submits a memo to French General Headquarters. De Gaulle is an unusual figure in the French army, a tank officer and military theorist who has spent years arguing, in print and in official channels, that France is preparing to fight the wrong war. His memo urges that French tanks be formed into independent armored divisions, capable of rapid offensive action, rather than being dispersed among infantry units as support weapons. He argues that mobility and concentration of armor will define the next phase of the war. His memo is rejected. French doctrine holds that tank supports infantry, and infantry advances at the pace of a walking man. De Gaulle is not wrong. France will discover this in May 1940.
In Belgium on November 11th, military leave is cancelled, and roads along the French border are being cleared to allow French forces to enter. The Dutch army has also cancelled leave and is reinforcing its border. The reason? Colonel Hans Oster of the Abwehr has passed word to the Dutch military attaché that a German invasion is imminent. Dutch Colonel Jacobus Sass is taking the warning seriously, even if his government isn't entirely sure what to do with it. Germany, through diplomatic channels, formally reassures the Netherlands and Belgium that their neutrality will be respected. Germany has been saying this for months, and it will keep saying it right up until the moment it stops being true.
November 13th brings two stories from Britain. First, a comedic anecdote. This day, German bombers attack the Shetland Islands, a cluster of islands about 100 miles north of the Scottish mainland and 200 miles west of Norway, closer to Bergen, Norway than in Edinburgh, Scotland. The bombers are looking for naval vessels and anchored flying boats. They drop their bombs and miss their targets. According to the stories, the damage inflicted on Britain consists of a deserted crofter's cottage and one rabbit. The British press has a field day. A famous photograph of a man holding a dead rabbit in a bomb crater was even staged with a rabbit from a local butcher. Germany officially claims hits on a cruiser and 2 aircraft. Their spokesman adds, with unintentional comedy, "This is only the beginning." The incident becomes associated with the popular wartime song, "Run, Rabbit, Run," which soon turns the story into national comedy, and a parody of that song is written called "Run, Adolf, Run," to make fun of the ineffectual Luftwaffe.
The second story from November 13th is much less comedic. Before dawn, 4 German destroyers secretly navigate the mouth of the Thames, the great tidal river that runs through the heart of London and out into the North Sea. And these destroyers lay a minefield in the shipping channels. The Thames estuary, if you picture it from above, is where the river widens into a broad funnel before meeting the sea, roughly 40 miles east of London. Every ship entering or leaving one of the world's busiest ports must pass through it. At 5:26 a.m., the British mine-laying cruiser HMS Adventure hits one of the newly laid mines and is badly damaged. The destroyer HMS Blanche moves to assist. At 8:20 a.m., Blanche hits a second mine. She is badly damaged, capsizes under tow, and sinks. She is the first British destroyer lost to enemy action in the war.
The magnetic mine crisis has been building for weeks. Ships have been sinking in British coastal waters with damage patterns that don't match conventional contact mines. The Admiralty knows a new weapon is being used, but doesn't yet fully understand how to counter it. The Thames minefield that kills HMS Blanche is a German destroyer operation. Not submarines, not aircraft, but surface ships sailing at night into one of Britain's most heavily trafficked waterways and laying mines virtually undetected. The answer to the magnetic mine is coming. It will arrive in spectacular fashion in the next few weeks, but on November 13th, the crisis is still building.
Also on November 13th, Finnish diplomats Paasikivi and Tanner leave Moscow for Helsinki. The talks are over. Stalin orders preparations for war, and the Soviet Defense Commissar Kliment Voroshilov orders Red Army units to move into their attack positions along the Finnish border. The units in the north are given a specific instruction not to violate Swedish territory and to salute Swedish border guards with due formality when encountered. They are being told to be polite to Sweden when they cut Finland in half. The confidence in Moscow is absolute. The war with Finland will be over in 2 weeks. November 17th, Vincennes, a suburb just east of Paris where the Supreme Allied Commander, General Maurice Gamelin, has his headquarters in a medieval castle. Gamelin reveals his plan for defending against a German attack through Belgium to his senior officers. The plan is called the Dyle Plan, named for the Dyle River, a small river in central Belgium roughly 20 miles east of Brussels, that the Allies intend to use as their main defensive line.
The plan calls for the best Allied forces, including the British Expeditionary Force and France's most mobile armored formations, to advance rapidly into Belgium the moment Germany attacks, racing north and east to hold the Dyle River line. The logic seems sound: engage Germany as far east as possible, keep the fighting off French soil, and defend along a prepared river line. The Anglo-French Supreme War Council formally endorses the plan on November 17th, and it becomes Allied policy.
Here is why this decision matters so much. We mentioned in a previous episode that General Erich von Manstein read Germany's original plan yellow, the advance through Belgium, and immediately identified it as too predictable, too similar to 1914. He has been pushing an alternative ever since, sends the main armored thrust through the Ardennes forest, further south, in the area the Allies have left virtually undefended because they consider it impassable for tanks. When the Dyle Plan works exactly as designed, when the Allies rush their best forces north into Belgium, the Ardennes to the south will be empty. Manstein's plan cuts behind them, reaches the English Channel, and traps the entire Allied northern force. One of the key decisions that will contribute to the fall of France is made in a suburb outside Paris in the second week of November 1939, and everyone in the room agrees it's a good plan. November 11th, Jan Opletal, the Czech medical student mentioned previously who was shot on October 28th during the Czech Independence Day demonstrations in Prague, dies of his wounds. He is 24 years old. His death is not unexpected. He has been in the hospital for 2 weeks, but it gives the German occupation authorities a problem. His fellow students want to hold a funeral. A funeral means a gathering. A gathering means a crowd. In Prague, in November 1939, a crowd means a demonstration.
The funeral is held on November 15th. Despite the presence of German security forces, thousands of students turn it into exactly what the authorities feared: a spontaneous anti-Nazi demonstration. People sing Czech national songs. They chant. Some confront the German police. The occupation authorities watch and take notes. They know exactly how they are going to solve this problem.
On November 17th, before dawn, German SS and police units storm university dormitories across Prague and other Czech cities simultaneously. Thousands of students are dragged from their beds and arrested. 9 student leaders connected to the demonstrations are executed by firing squad that morning without trial, without charges being filed. Their names are read aloud before they're shot. Over 1,200 students are sent to concentration camps, primarily to Sachsenhausen, north of Berlin. Every university and college in the Czech lands is closed indefinitely. The closures will last until the end of the war.
November 17th is now observed as International Students' Day in countries around the world, in memory of the 9 students executed in Prague that morning. It is one of those dates whose significance is invisible to most people who live with it on their calendars. 9 student leaders connected to the demonstrations were shot without trial in the aftermath of a funeral. That is what it commemorates.
Also on November 17th, Eduard Beneš, the former president of Czechoslovakia, in exile in Paris since the German occupation, establishes the Czech National Committee, the nucleus of what will become the Czechoslovak government in exile. It follows the same path as the Polish government in exile, an occupied country reconstituting its legitimate political authority outside its borders, refusing to accept that occupation means extinction. The pattern is becoming familiar and will continue to do so.
A few last notes from the week. On November 15th, Admiral Raeder asks his staff to evaluate the possibility of invading Britain. an early step in what will eventually become the planning for Operation Sea Lion. The Graf Spee sinks the British motor tanker Africa Shell in the Indian Ocean on November 15th, her first kill outside the Atlantic. In China, the Battle of South Guangxi begins on November 15th as Japan lands troops on China's southern coast, trying to cut off supply routes from the south. And on November 9th, at Radio City Music Hall in New York, the film Ninocha premieres, with actress Greta Garbo playing a humorless Soviet official who falls in love in Paris. The tagline is, "Garbo laughs." It is nominated for 4 Academy Awards, all while the Soviet Union prepares an invasion force.
So this week in summary, Britain suffers a devastating blow to its intelligence network in Western Europe. Finland's negotiators come home to a country that thinks that the worst is over. The Allies endorse a battle plan that Germany will exploit to a devastating effect. The British public observe Armistice Day without being told to. Prague students are executed in the aftermath of a funeral, and the soldier's turn is coming. Next episode, the Winter War begins. Thanks for joining us for episode 12 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then.